Beautiful skyline of New York City as world leaders meet for the 72nd session of the United Nations General Assembly. With heavy media presence from all over the world, the Communications Directorate at the Presidency in Ghana brings you the special edition as President Akufo Addo addressed the United Nations General Assembly for the first time as President of Ghana. Hello, I'm Jefferson Saki in New York, and you're welcome to this special edition coming to you today right in front of the 39-story Secretariat building on 42nd Street and 1st Avenue in Manhattan. The mission today is to bring you details of President Akufo Addo's participation of the 72nd United Nations General Assembly, and it starts right now. The journey to the 72nd United Nations General Assembly started on Friday the 15th of September 2017 when President Akufo Addo left Accra for New York. He arrived here on Saturday the 16th of September and started work right away. The Director of Communications at the Presidency, Mr. Eugene, immediately outlined the President's itinerary.
Sometime in April, the new UN General Secretary appointed President Akufo Addo as co-chair of the eminent group of advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals. The first meeting of the advocates will be held at the UN General Assembly, basically to mobilize political will across the entire world for support of the SDGs. We know that, God willing, by 2030, there are 17 developmental goals that have been put forth by the UN, for which almost all countries on the world have subscribed to. So at least the policies, the measures, everything we have to put in place to ensure that by the year 2030, all these sustainable development goals, 17 in total, are achieved. At least should be done. The requisite political will to make sure that all African leaders, all heads of state across the world subscribe to this particular SDGs and make sure that it's implemented for the well-being of their peoples. And one of the SDGs speaks also about the empowerment of women and girls. And we know that with the President being the AU Gender Champion for 2017, we know that he's also going to espouse certain things that he's been doing in Ghana with regards to policies and programs and measures we are putting in place to ensure that at least we empower the Ghanaian woman and the Ghanaian girl child to ensure that they also access whatever needs they have to access to improve upon their lives.
And that's the Director of Communications at the Presidency, Mr. Eugene, giving details of the President's itinerary on the first day of arrival here in New York. Well, as eminent member of the United Nations Development Goal, President Akufo Addo held meetings with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on progress made so far as the SDGs are concerned. And on U.S.-Africa relations, the President of the Republic, Nana Akufo Addo, together with 8 other African heads of state, on Wednesday, the 20th of September, held talks with the President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump. Well, the U.S. President indicated further that his administration is committed to extending partnership with these countries. Also present in that particular meeting was Ghana's Foreign Minister, Honorable Shirley Ayoko-Botwe, who joins me now in this special edition of the Presidential Diary. Madam, this might have been a very interesting UN General Assembly for you and for our country, and a very busy one, I guess.
It's been very, very useful. As you're well aware, he's the co-chair of the UN SDGs. And on his very first day in the US, he held meetings on the SDGs with the other advocates. And they basically looked at the role that they had to play in order to spearhead the achievement of the goals that we've set for ourselves. And it was a very frank meeting that they had, looked at ways in which they could all put their shoulders to the wheel. And indeed, he also made the point that everybody who has been appointed as an advocate has to necessarily be part of this achievement, because you cannot just stay back after having been appointed and not do visible work towards the achievement. So it was an interesting conversation that they had. The meeting was, like I said, frank, and they all made up their minds that, the commitment to work was going to show from henceforth.
And it was interesting how the U.S. President Donald Trump, when he was going to deliver his speech, tapped President Akufo Addo on the shoulder. Describe the atmosphere in this particular room for us.
Yes,
and you were
let me say
by.
that it was a very cordial meeting and very frank. From the very beginning, he said to the heads of state who were there that he wanted to learn from them what U.S. can do in partnering Africa. For us, it gave us one signal, and that is the U.S. has Africa as part of its policy. And unlike what we've heard since he became president, which is that Africa doesn't feature at all in his policy, this was a clear indication that this is not so. He wanted to learn from them. And it's interesting, like you said, the positioning of the heads of state. President Akufo Addo was seated. He was the president right to his left after his national security advisor and, of course, I think his chief of staff. And he sort of deferred to all of them, but the eye contact was quite interesting in the whole discourse.
And key question, what was the criteria in selecting these 8 African countries and African leaders?
I believe that it's not to say that the others are not important, but I think that those who are around the table come with a special kind of prominence in African affairs. And I think that was key. You had the AU chair there, President Alpha Conde. You had Ghana's President Akufo Addo, who represents Ghana, which is a beacon when it comes to democracy. Ghana is being looked at favorably from all fronts. And it cannot be said that a meeting of that sort would happen without Ghana being there. Then, of course, you had big economies like Nigeria, like South Africa there, and important economies also like Cote d'Ivoire, and so on and so forth, Namibia. So I think it was a good mix, representing all the different parts of the continent. And of course, it brought to the fore those who actually are in the forefront of democracy.
Honorable Shelley Ayoko-Botwe, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ghana, many thanks for joining me today on this special edition, and wish you all the best. On Monday, the 18th of September, the President of the Republic also delivered a keynote address at the 5th International Conference on Sustainable Development at a packed auditorium of the Earth Institute at Columbia University here in New York. He stated that African countries would have to change the structure of their economies from raw material dependent economies to industrialized value-added economies if they are to fully finance the implementation of the 17 UN Development Goals.
Truth be told, the full implementation of the SDGs in Africa cannot be done with a mindset of dependence. This has to change, and it begins with identifying our priorities and implementing them. Our first priority must be to change the structures of the economies on the continent, which are dependent largely on the production and export of raw materials. It is this reliance on raw materials that feeds our dependence on foreign aid and subjects us to the politics of the West. We cannot be doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Africa needs to transform stagnant, jobless economies built on the export of raw materials and unrefined goods to value-added economies that provide jobs, to build strong middle-class societies and lift the masses of our people out of dire poverty. There are many amongst us who cannot accept that it is only Asians who can engineer their transition from poverty to prosperity in a generation. We're determined to emulate that in our generation in Africa and ensure that succeeding generations of Africans will be neither victims nor pawns of the international economic order. Indeed, the project should be Africa Beyond Aid. Let it serve as the impetus for reshaping the continent and charting a new path of growth and development and freedom, which will lift the long-suffering African masses out of poverty into the realms of prosperity and dignified existence. Once again, I thank you sincerely for making me a part of this conversation. Thank you, and may God bless us all.
President Akufo Addo there at the Columbia University. Present there also was the Deputy Chief of Staff, Mr. Samuel Abu Jinapo. Many thanks for your time, Mr. Jinapo. This must be your very first time at the United Nations General Assembly.
Oh yes, this is my first time. Extraordinary experience.
And what's your take on the President's presence here at the General Assembly?
Well, the President has been very busy in New York, and he's been busy for good reasons. He's been lifting the flag of our country and the image of our country. At the Columbia University, the President delivered a speech on sustainable development goals. As you may be very much aware, the United Nations has set a set of 17 goals to be attained in the year 2030. And the President has a distinguished honor of co-chairing the group of eminent advocates alongside the Prime Minister of Norway. The President was invited to the Columbia University to deliver this all-important speech, at which event he reiterated the point of respective countries of the world working to attain these goals, and made the point, which for me was quite profound, that indeed the goals are set out by the United Nations are real, and they have real impact on real human beings. And he gave the example of Hurricane Irma and the horrendous impact that it's had on the United States and several other countries, and therefore the necessity and the importance, the imperativeness for the world to mobilize its resources to attain these goals. I think that the President also talked about what we in Ghana are trying to do, and under his leadership, how we are seeking to educate our people, seeking to industrialize our economy, seeking to broaden the frontiers of democratic accountability, and hopefully in all of that, to achieve the goals that the United Nations have set for the world. I think that the President delivered such a powerful speech at Columbia University. It was a rousing, standing ovation and acceptance of his speech. And you saw a true Ghanaian statesman delivering his thoughts on how Ghana, Africa, and the world can make our continent and our planet a better place for all of us.
Let me ask you a question from Denise on Twitter. She tweeted in to you. What are some of the ways you plan on engaging younger Ghanaians in your sustainable development goals?
It's really finding, accepting, and utilizing the ways that young people talk to themselves and to the world. I mean, clearly today, perhaps even much more than when I was first growing up, marching on the streets and things may no longer be the form of protest or engagement. The world of Twitter, Instagram, these are the tools today which young people communicate. So we have to find a way of being able to get into that and use these instruments as a way of connecting and making it clear to people that, yes, it may sound as if it is a distant phenomenon when you talk about the Sustainable Development Goals being articulated by Antonio Guterres on the platform of the United Nations, addressing the Assembly of Heads of Governments, etc. But at the end of the day, they reflect the realities of the lives of people. And that is
interesting. And during the interview with President Akufo Addo, I think he stressed on very important things. He said, for example, that youth participation in this particular session is so important. He used, for example, the free senior high school policy that is being implemented in Ghana as an example where government can also contribute to these kinds of developments. Your take on that?
The fourth goal set by the United Nations is for every child in the world by the year 2030 to be educated. And as you know, the impact of education, we are right here in New York, in the United States, where we can see for ourselves monumental, transformative development having taken place here. And Americans took a deliberate decision to educate all of their children some 100 years ago. We are seeing the consequences right in our faces as we live in New York here. And it's exactly what the President seeks to achieve for the people of Ghana. which is that every child in Ghana, regardless of their economic standing or the financial standing of their parents, will have the opportunity to be enrolled into school from kindergarten to senior high school without having to take up any financial burden with their education. And I think that this has resonated quite well with people in our country and with people in Africa, and indeed with many people that we've had the opportunity to interact even on the global stage. It turns out to be arguably one of the most far-reaching, comprehensive social interventionist policies in Africa.
Interesting. Just stay with us. We're not done with this particular conversation. We'll get back to it. But the New York Public Library also hosted President Akufo Addo, where he received the Africa America Institute, or AAI's National Achievement Award on behalf of the people of Ghana. The award recognizes Ghana's status as a free, democratic and stable country in Africa. President Akufo Addo paid tribute to a tall list actually of Ghanaians who made the receipt of the award possible. Take a listen to this.
The Africa America Institute selected Ghana because of Ghana's accomplishments, but we also looked at what is going on in the world and the choices being made by political leaders, and we could think of no better example of a real moral and courageous leader than President Akufo Addo. So it's with great pleasure that we bestow this award for the people of Ghana, but we also recognize and applaud the leadership you've shown, which is so important, more important now than in many years. Thank you so much, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, over the course of our history, the Ghanaian people have had to overcome several trials and tribulations: slavery, imperialism, colonialism, tyranny, and dictatorship. We once lived in a country where freedom of speech was suppressed, where the safeguards of trial, the rule of law, were set aside, where individual property rights were disregarded by the state because the citizen had no guaranteed rights, and where citizens went to jail for expressing honest opinions. Nonetheless, what our history has taught us is that the spirit of the Ghanaian, in his or her quest for peace, progress, and prosperity, cannot be quenched. We are a determined lot who cannot be deterred. It took us a while, but the consensus on multi-party constitutional democratic rule has been established in Ghana. We want to create a society of opportunities and incentives. We have to build a confident Ghana, which is united, at peace with itself, and takes pride in its diversity, and which continues to pursue its Pan-African vocation. It will not be easy. We have no illusions whatsoever about the nature of the task that we face. But I know that Ghanaians will rise to the occasion. They always do. The Black Star is going to shine and shine and shine.
Let's actually move on to the Plaza Hotel here in New York also, where many of the most significant world leaders and international CEOs gathered to address and work actually to solve the many pressing economic issues facing the world today. President Akufo Addo was one of the few African leaders invited to speak at the Bloomberg Global Business Forum. Former US President Bill Clinton, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau were among the speakers at this year's forum. Here is President Akufo Addo speaking on sustainable development and Ghana's role so far as the developments are concerned.
Global outcomes, if they're to succeed, means that they have to succeed in Africa. And that is for a reason that is manifest. Unfortunately, Africa, sitting on the greatest resources in the world, also has the poorest populations. so that if the goals are going to be seen to have succeeded, they will have been succeeded if they succeed in Africa. I think that the most important consideration for those of us who have been given the privilege of political leadership is to find a way of selling the goals to our populations as something that has a direct impact on their life. Not something that was created in New York by a group of politicians and bureaucrats to fashion things to keep them going, but that they are in fact intended to have an impact on the everyday lives of all of us. There's some, obviously, that can have directly a greater impact than others, and which are also measurable. As far as I'm concerned, the most important of them, of course, is education. If we can, and it is eminently feasible, be in a situation where by 2030 we can say that all of Africa's children are in school and having access to good quality education, the impact of that on the development of the continent and on the quality of life of the people would be enormous. It's an important development in world history, and for myself, well, to some extent I have a professional interest. I'm the co-chair of the group of advocates, the eminent group of eminent persons that Antonio Guterres has put together to sell the SDGs to the world. But it is something that is a major challenge. It's something that I believe is worth doing, and the obvious benefits of it to the global community are obvious. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to come and share some thoughts about this with you. Thank you.
Well, that's President Akufo Addo speaking there at the Bloomberg Global Business Forum. Abu Jinapo, your observation at this particular forum, because you were actually present.
Very extraordinary experience and very important platform. As you rightly said, President of Canada, President of Netherlands, former President of the United States, and many, many other leaders in the spheres of finance, religion, business communities and politics, public service and the rest were gathered at the Plaza Hotel for this Bloomberg Global Business Forum. And I think that it was such a remarkable platform for the President to deliver very profound observations about sustainable development goals. The President made one very important point, which I believe is worth reiterating, which is that Ghana and Africa are going to have to find intelligent ways of building our own economies, that we're going to have to find intelligent ways of adding value to our produce and ensuring that we get a maximum benefit from the value chain of the produce that we generate in our respective countries.
I'll give you a simple example. Côte d'Ivoire and ourselves, between us, we produce 60% of the world's output of cocoa. 2015, the returns to us, 2 billion to Ghana, 3.75 billion to Côte d'Ivoire, 5.75 billion amongst us. The global chocolate market is of 100 billion plus. So you're looking at a situation whereby the farmers who produce get something like 5 to 5.5% of the global value chain of their product. Something is not right there, and we need to do something about it.
What can you do? Do you need to renegotiate with the big suppliers, with the makers of chocolate?
I think that we have to perhaps make the chocolate ourselves. We have to find a way of being able to connect the raw material to the finished product, because that is where the value is. And so far we've been either out of negligence on our part or the difficulties of mobilizing the finance and the technology. We've not been able to do it. I think that this generation of African leaders, these are the issues that we have to look at.
I think these are the things that the President has been talking about at Bloomberg, and these are the things that he and his counterpart in La Côte d'Ivoire are seeking to achieve. It is a vision that is articulated so brilliantly, which is a Ghana beyond aid and an Africa beyond aid. And the tools, it's not just rhetoric, it's not just sloganerism. it's a vision that he is putting in place the requisite tools to achieve. And one of the examples is what he is seeking to do in the cocoa industry, amongst many others.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, j'ai l'honneur de souhaiter la bienvenue à l'Organisation des Nations Unies à son Excellence Monsieur Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo Addo, Président de la République du Ghana. Je l'invite à présent.
Well, on his big day at the UN General Assembly, President Akufo Addo highlighted several interventions being pursued by his government since he assumed office. He also touched on socio-economic development in Africa.
Ghana was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to gain her freedom from colonial rule. This year marks the 60th anniversary of that independence. And it is auspicious that I'm addressing this assembly for the first time on the birth date of our historic first president, Kwame Nkrumah, a day we have set aside to commemorate him. We believe it is time Africa comes of age and holds its rightful place on the world stage. This Africa will be neither a pawn nor a victim. This Africa will be honest to itself and to the world, and this Africa will shed its cloak of poverty and become prosperous. We are not under any illusions about the hard work that it will take to achieve our stated goals, but we are not afraid of hard work. We know that a critical ingredient in making sustainable economic progress is to ensure a stable democratic system of governance. We continue to be a beacon of democracy and stability on the continent. Our institutions of state are growing stronger, and we have made more progress with our economy than at any time since independence. Mr. President, we're nowhere near where we want to be, but we are determined to realize our potential and make Ghana a prosperous nation. We want to build a Ghana that will enable our people to deal with the rest of the world on an equal basis. I say nothing new when I draw attention to the urgent need to reform this organization. It has been talked about and scheduled for a long time, but somehow we have never found the courage and the will to reform the United Nations. Ghana supports the process of UN reform, especially of the UN Security Council, as set out in Africa's common position on UN reform, based on the Esselwini Consensus. The time is long overdue to correct the long-standing injustice that the current structure and composition of the UN Security Council represent for the nations of Africa. We cannot continue to preach democracy and fairness around the world. We cannot insist on peace and justice around the world when our global organization is not seen by the majority of its members as having a structure that is just and fair. It is indeed seen by many as helping to perpetuate an unfair world order. This organization provides the best vehicle for the world to manage its many varied problems, and we would undermine its credibility and fail in our duty if we do not reform the United Nations. We dare not let ourselves and future generations down. The time for reform has come. I thank you very much for your attention.
And that's President Akufo Addo there addressing the United Nations General Assembly for the first time as President of the Republic of Ghana. Well, this may not be his first time of speaking here at the United Nations. Back in 2006 and 2007, he also presided over as the President of the United Nations Security Council. Mr. Abu Jinapor, Deputy Chief of Staff, is still with me here. The President might have said it all.
First of all, I think that the President has made all of us very proud as Ghanaians. I've never felt this proud as a Ghanaian before. You saw a Ghanaian statesman on an international platform speaking to the world about the issues which confront our people in Ghana. and articulating a very broad, workable vision for his country. He also saw an African leader who spoke for Africa and made some very profound statements, such as Africa is no longer going to become a scar on the conscience of the world. He spoke about the need for Africa to be honest to itself and the fact that Africa is going to be honest to itself, and spoke also about some of the things that his government is putting in place to ensure that we propel our country from the difficulties we find ourselves in today into a country of dignity, of prosperity, of all the good things that we wish for ourselves. I think in a nutshell, this is a president whom, since being inaugurated on the 7th of January this year, is continuously lifted the flag of our country. And today in New York, and today at the hall of the United Nations before world leaders, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo Addo once again lifted the image of our country, lifted the flag of Ghana, made every Ghanaian very proud, and made myself very proud, and spoke to truth and spoke to vision that he has for Africa and for Ghana. I think we can all be proud and we can all celebrate him. It was a speech which was devoid of sectarianism, it was devoid of division, it was devoid of pettiness, and it spoke to the bigger issues, the big issues, the matters which should agitate the minds of Africans and the minds of Ghanaians. I think this is a great day for the Republic of Ghana.
Samuel Abu Jinapo, Deputy Chief of Staff, Office of the President in Ghana, many thanks for your time and enjoy your stay here in New York City. And on that note, we end today's special edition, coming to you today from the United Nations headquarters in New York City, the 72nd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Log on to www.presidency.gov.gh and the other social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram for more updates. I'm Jefferson Saki. Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of the Presidential Diary. See you next time.
Oh, no.